Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, Neil Gibb, and today I am very, very happy to have the OG of investing in cash flow positive properties. It's Mr. Steve McKnight. Steve, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Well, thank you. And when you paused for a second, I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to come next? I'm very happy to have. Anyway, we all got there in the end. Thanks for the opportunity, and hello, everyone.
Thank you. When I started this podcast, if I could make a list of people that I'd love to get on here eventually, because you've got to start small and work your way up, build the audience up so you can attract the right guests. You were definitely at the top or very close to the top of that list because of, your reputation and standing in the industry, mate. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time out to come on the podcast.
It's very kind of you. And clearly now you've peaked and on the downhill run if you've got me on now.
I remember when I first got into real estate, one of the first books I read was Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which we'll talk about your journey in a second. But not long after that book, the second book that I read was 0 to 130 Properties in 3.5 years. And this sort of started the search for cash flow positive investments for us, because negative gearing, coming from the UK, negative gearing just wasn't a thing. The cost of real estate was so cheap and the rents were so high that everything, produced a 6% yield or higher. And you needed a 25% deposit to go down on them. So a lot of the stuff that my friends were investing in, everything was giving them a positive return. So it was a foreign concept to see. We lose money to then get it back in a tax return and hope that we see capital growth.
It is a classic Australian way of investing that, hey, I get to save tax and make money. Who doesn't want to do that?
Yeah.
It's not until you get into the strategy that you realize you get a tax deduction for a loss. And then you've got to ask yourself a question. Does it make sense that I'm making a loss? Like, do I want to get into investing to make a profit or a loss? The profit I might make versus the loss I will make. And that's why it never made sense to me. And because I used to be an accountant and I didn't want to do accounting anymore, I had to find another way to replace the income I got from selling my time. And it was at that Robert Kiyosaki seminar, which I went to after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad Like You, that it dawned on me that there is another way. It's called positive cash flow. You can make a cash flow gain and a capital gain. It's not an or a capital gain. It's an and a capital gain. And for those of you who haven't read the book, maybe you've played the game Monopoly, same in real life. You start off by renting properties out. You look at value add strategies, 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. And the red hotel is commercial real estate, which is where I've ended up later on in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the negative gearing side of things and saving tax, where has that mindset come from in the majority of Australians? Because there is a small majority that are on the cash flow train. No doubt, thanks to people like yourself and Robert Kiyosaki and other people that are out there now preaching from the same choir. But where is the tax saving or tax minimization mindset come from in the Australians?
Pathological hatred of paying tax. People would rather lose money and save tax than make money and pay tax. It's a mindset that needs to be cured if you want to be beyond averagely wealthy. You have to see tax as a byproduct of success, not tax as something that can be saved if it hurts you doing so.
Yeah, it's a cost of business, right?
It's a cost of business. Now, you don't want to pay more tax than you have to. So structuring and tax planning is part of what you need to do. But don't be afraid of paying tax if you're making money.
It's a good thing, right? It means you're doing the right thing, making money. So Steve, take us back to the very start, the first property that you bought.
Back at the very start.
What was that property?
So you've got to understand, prior to owning one property, I owned no properties, which of course makes sense. But not only did I own no properties, I had no idea what I was doing whatsoever, other than playing Monopoly more or less and moving bits around the board. So after the Robert Kiyosaki seminar, the first thing I had to do was to convince my business partner at the time to take some time out of work to get in the car and go to Ballarat. Now, why didn't we just go up on the weekend? Why didn't we just phone up real estate agents? And this is a great lesson for today, particularly in hot markets. If you do what everyone else has done, you'll get what everyone else has got. And the best time to be looking for real estate is when other people aren't. So getting in the car and being at the real estate agent's office on a Monday or a Tuesday morning when everyone else is at work and it's after the weekend, so things have gone quiet, allows you to gain access not only to the agent, but to be driven around, to talk to the agent, build a relationship with the agent, so that when an opportunity arises, that agent, through that network or relationship that you've built, is more likely to come to you first. So in that early day, I can remember with Mick Golding from Ballarat Real Estate. He's still in my phone. I call him up about once every 2 years. Mick, how you going? He drove us around, Dave and I around, and even one house that had sold in a government auction a couple of weeks beforehand, we crawled through the window of that house because we didn't have keys to get in. Then he's like, come on, boys, come into this one and I'll show you around. And so you get access to opportunities other people don't have when you do things that other people won't do. Now, I'm not talking about being illegal or immoral or anything else like that, but simply turning up when other people aren't there is a great start. And so that first trip didn't yield good results. I don't think the second trip yielded anything, but by the third trip that we'd made up there and built this relationship, we managed to buy that first property, from memory, $44,000, about $120 a week, positive cash flow, gross. So by the time you paid all expenses, we only made about $20 a week. $20 a week, 52 weeks a year, $1,000 give or take, wasn't going to get us out of the rat race, but it was a step in a positive direction, pun intended. So what that allowed us to do is say, well, now we own one. How do we go from 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, etc.? And that's the story that I talked about in 0 to 130. More or less, how do you take a concept you might learn off Robert Kiyosaki and apply it in Australia to get to an outcome where you don't need to work anymore? And that book was well received. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and went on to be Australia's Business Book of the Year. And a lot of people heard the name Steve McKnight. And I never wrote the book to make money or to build anything in particular. I was just sharing a story. Hey, this has worked for me, and there's lots of ways of making money in real estate. Maybe it'll work for you if you want to give it a go.
Do you think it worked so well, or it was so well received because it was kind of a foreign concept?
I think it was a novel concept. I didn't want to call it 0 to 130. The publishers wanted to call that. To me, it was a bit of a wanker title. You know, look at what I've done. Very showy, and I'm not that kind of person. I think I wanted to call it From Life Sentence to Life Story, How to Use Real Estate to Retire, or something a bit nebulous like that. And they're like, nah, you're not calling it that. You can call it 0 to 130 properties in 3.5 years. And I'm like, so to this very day, I'm still a bit embarrassed by the title, because although it's factually accurate, it's not how many properties you own that matters. I don't own 130 properties today. I own a commercial property in Rockhampton, a commercial property in Hobart, and I have a giant investment in the fund that I run that buys commercial properties around Australia. Moved on from the commercial property fund in the US that I did run, which has now ended. So I find the less properties you own, the less aggravation you have. And therefore, owning 130 properties, people think, well, that must be the ticket out. But no, when you have that many properties, you've got a lot of other problems around aggravation, administration, etc. So you can often end up with another job. And if you want to get passive income, you've got to find a way where you don't trade one job for another.
Interesting that you say you've pulled right back and you've gone from 130. I think the second book was called 0 to 260 properties, wasn't it, in 7.5 years?
Yeah, look, I went big again at the start of the GFC when I went over to the United States and bought 200 or 300 dwellings. And I then realized the management was anything but passive. The income might have been passive in the sense that I didn't have to work for it at that time. But no, I've found that if you paint a picture and you paint yourself in the center of it, then you'll never get out of the picture. So the real art is to build something that doesn't have you front and center in it, so you can get the benefit of it without having to work in it.
Interesting. Did you set the goal to purchase that many properties, Steve, or did it just naturally happen or progressively happen?
Well, the number of properties was a function of the goal. The goal was 250 grand in passive income by 9 May 2004. And that was 125 for Dave and 125 for me. And that would have replaced the money we were earning in the accounting practice.
Yeah.
So then it became a question of, well, how many properties do you have to own to get 250 grand a year in net investment income? And the answer was 130. And then once again, how do you buy 130 properties when you don't know how to buy one property at a time? And then evolve as the market evolves so that you tailor your strategy to the problem that exists in the market. And when I got started, it was vendor finance that allowed us to get in and buy properties cheap and on-sell them for a positive cash flow outcome. And these days, it might be something like what you're doing around the dwellings and the multi-people in one dwelling and high occupancy homes as a way of building cash flow. Now, that's great. The problem I see with that strategy is not the outcome. I think it probably works really well. The problem I see with the strategy is much like what I encountered with vendor finance, is that the administration and the aggravation that comes with tenant churn, people moving in and people moving out, can mean that the income is passive somewhat in nature, but it still requires a certain amount of time and effort, and that's fine. But you come to a point in life where you probably want the income without the effort, and so you've got to look for some other way of generating that. And I've found that commercial real estate is a vehicle that can do that in certain circumstances with a certain approach.
Yeah. I don't know, you said the admin and the aggravation around this. When you've got that many properties, I'm guessing that all of a sudden becomes a full-time job just to manage that portfolio.
Well, we never managed our own properties. We managed the vendor finance because they were unique. But when it came time to transition out of vendor finance and buy blocks of units, we would always get managers in. And in the properties that I run in the funds that I have, they have their own managers, because I have a saying that money follows management. And the theory is this: would you rather have a bad property in the hands of a good manager or a good property in the hands of a bad manager? Now, a bad manager can turn a good property bad and a bad property worse, but a good manager can turn a bad property good and a good property better. So typically a mistake people make is they go and buy an asset for hundreds of thousands of dollars and put it in the hands of the cheapest property manager they can find. Well, remember, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, which makes no sense whatsoever. So I always say, don't starve what you need to feed and feed what you need to starve. If money follows management, find the best manager you can afford to manage that asset for you, because get it wrong and your property will create big time headaches and potentially even lose money. Get it right and your manager will take the aggravation away for you. They'll get paid for it, but don't begrudge someone getting paid for solving a problem.
Absolutely. That's what a business is, right?
Ultimately, and everyone in a job gets paid for solving a problem. And that's the way the world goes around.
Steve, I speak to a lot of property investors now that have equity rich, cash flow poor. They've got 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6 properties, but they're stuck. Obviously, their current climate isn't helping them. They're unable to release equity from the portfolio, but at the same time, nobody wants to sell down properties to free themselves up so they can move forward again. At what stage did you think it was the right time to start getting rid of some of the properties that you've got to now come back to 2 properties plus the fund?
There's 2 things I'd say about that. The first is that someone that finds themselves in an equity locked position probably didn't have a big plan to begin with. They just bought good quality assets. They bought one, they bought another one, they bought another one, and then bang, that's it, they're out. So there's no sustainability to their investing beyond a portfolio of 3 properties. That explains why so many people, I think it was 92%, random stat, back when I wrote 0 to 130, 92% of investors owned 1 or 2 properties. And that was a thing that I wondered about. Why do so few people own why do so many people own so few real estate or bits of real estate? Why do so few people own so many bits of real estate? The system that someone must be following must be flawed. So if you go down that negative gearing model, you're not investing for income, you're investing for growth. And if you're investing for growth and you've got negative cash flow, sooner or later you max yourself out on your borrowing ability. So you're locked out. You can't keep going. What do? You're better off working out your pathway before you start rather than when you encounter the problem. But that's too late to say to someone who's already 3 properties in. So that then comes to the second question you asked. The time to sell is when you can make more money sooner with less risk and or lower aggravation. So it may be that in order to move on, you have to sacrifice one of the sacred cows, pay tax because you're going to make a capital gain, and then pay down the debt. The profit will flow onto your tax return, which hopefully will demonstrate your ability to be able to leverage more on the next deal and allow you to keep going. But if you're in this mindset that you absolutely will not pay tax under any circumstance, you're only ever going to want to refinance the equity you've got, you increase your credit risk and you get to the position where you can't sustain any more properties in your portfolio, and that's as far as you're going to grow. You've effectively got a shoe that's limiting how much your foot will grow. And of course, that's back to front because the size of your foot should determine the size of your shoe.
And at what stage did you think was the right stage in the journey for you to then start selling down some of the portfolio and switch to commercial?
Well, we didn't have a choice in the early days because these properties we bought for $44,000 and vendor financed on at 65. The values of those properties started to go up and people started refinancing us out. And so our cash flow turned into lump sum gain, and we're like, oh no, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen because we want the cash flow. We don't want the cash. But we ended up without the cash flow and having cash, and that's why we transitioned into blocks of units. I didn't really make a serious play into commercial property. I did own some commercial property in the early days, but that was just a random fluke dabble until I started getting the US commercial property fund back in 2012 up and running, because I'd seen what was happening to US resi property and was convinced that US commercial property was going to roar back for various reasons, which hindsight has shown it did. And so I found myself a mentor. I did some training, learnt about it, and started buying commercial property, and then realised I should have been doing this from the start. I just didn't know any better. I thought the pathway to riches had to go through residential real estate. And for some, if you're after a growth return, it's smart to look to residential. But if you're after income, very rarely will you get that in residential unless you do something like having multi-tenants in one property or some sort of vendor finance type creative strategy. If you're just after a buy and hold, buy something, put a tenant in it, then you're likely to get a 2 or 3% gross return, which will be negative after interest. So it's negatively geared. And that's going to force you to need your job more because you're going to have income to offset it against and to pay for the shortfall. So the transition for me into commercial was because I've always been an income investor. And as I understood resi prices going up more and income going down, it wasn't the product that was going to achieve my outcome that I desired.
Cool. You said earlier that the goal was to achieve $250,000 cash flow and real estate was the vehicle to get you there. In the book Money Magnet, you talk about you pull some stats from the superannuation, I can't remember, association website of an investor, an individual needs $600,000 in super at retirement and $66,000 a year cash flow. Is that correct? Am I close with them figures?
Yeah, Australian Association of Super Funds. You can look it up and find out what the stats are. They update them periodically. But the point of it is that when you look at super, what often people do is they look at how much money they've got in super and they turn it into a lump sum amount. The real thing you want to look at with super, without giving people advice, is how much income you're getting, because it's not the lump sum you want to live off, because otherwise you're just spending money and not getting it back. It's the annuity or the income stream from your superannuation that will become all important, because that will fund your lifestyle. So again, there's two ways of investing. There's growth, there's income. If you are investing for growth in your super fund, that's typically suitable while you're in the accumulation phase. But when you switch over to the pension phase, which is drawing down on your super, you want to maybe switch over or consider switching over from a growth focus to an income focus, so that you're not eating into your capital. So the point I was making in Money Magnet, which is the latest book that I've written, is that there's really 4 things you need to know. Like, if you want to be wealthy, no one ever taught me this, so it's sort of rich Uncle Steve telling you about how to not make the mistakes that he made. First of all, you need to make money. How do you make money? Most people swap their time for money. Great, go and do that. Go and grab a job. Do whatever you need to do to make money. Add an income accelerator if you can by selling your knowledge for income via the internet. That's what I did with propertyinvesting.com. Second of all, you need to manage the money you make. It's no point making money if you're not managing it and everything you earn goes out the door and some. So there's a certain system you're going to have to find that works for you, that allows you to be accountable to spend less than you earn. Otherwise, you'll never get ahead. But spending less than you earn will not make you rich. You can't save your way to wealth, right? Savings are a store of wealth. They're not a source of wealth. In order to turn savings into capital, it has to be deployed for return. And so a lot of people have savings and they're going, look at me, I'm doing so well, I'm saving money. And I go, well, all that represents is effectively buying power that you haven't yet deployed, but your savings aren't going to make you rich, because your return on your savings after tax is nil or negative. You need to learn how to deploy that, which is the third step, which is multiplying. And then regardless of making, managing and multiplying, none of this makes sense at all unless you've got a context for your wealth, significance or survival, which is what I call making your money matter. And then as you can find a reason for going to the effort of spending less than you earn and the effort of it, learning how to invest and managing your money, et cetera, then all of a sudden, all going well, you won't have to worry about money anymore because you'll have survival sorted. But then how do you add legacy into your life? How do you add meaning into your life beyond just knowing you've got enough money to pay the bills? That's a question of significance. Using your money to touch, move and inspire other people, which will then create some sort of enduring benefit for others after you've gone.
Do you mind sharing ways that you use your wealth to help others?
Well, I mean, you're probably thinking, Steve, wherever you are looks pretty budget. And it is. It's an 1880s house on about a 6.5-hour drive out of Melbourne on 1,500 acres of land that I purchased for about $700,000. And I've spent $4 million planting 300,000 trees up here to create a native forest on land that was unsuitable for farming. So this is a legacy project. I'm not sure it's ever going to make much money, but to be able to come up here now 5 years on and look at the trees that are growing out of the ground and seeing nature healing itself and the ecosystem restoring itself makes me feel like I'm doing something beyond just having a bigger and fatter bank account by more and more money going into it. All the royalties from the books I've written, every single cent of royalty, not the profits, everything has gone into a family foundation, which has given well over $1 million away over the years to charities such as the Smith family and other charities that support disadvantaged children in particular. I do a lot of philanthropic work in the faith community that I belong to, and just find ways of blessing people. So yeah, when you've got money, you can do something with it. Some people hoard it. I always say, just remember, money won't hug you back. Doesn't stop people from hugging in. But, you know, the old cliches of you can't take it with you and shrouds don't have pockets and you don't want to be the richest person in the graveyard. And there's a number of these sayings are all true. You have a finite ability to use your wealth. So make sure you use it wisely, because when you die, it's the end of of what you can't come back from the grave and use your money to buy something, right? So some people say, oh, I just want to die and leave money to my kids. And I'm like, well, is that really a smart plan? And they're like, what do you mean? Aren't we setting up the next generation for success? And I'm like, probably not, because if you give someone money they haven't worked for, guess what they're going to do with it?
Missed it.
Well, probably.
Yeah.
And then what they might do is they might buy stuff that is a temporary hit that they can't really afford, and then get used to a lifestyle they can't afford, and then ultimately end up worse off because they have to use debt to remain in the lifestyle that they want. So instead of your money being an enduring legacy, it becomes a sugar hit that doesn't last beyond a single generation, because ultimately the kids go, great, mum or dad's died now and we've got this windfall gain, let's go and buy a Tesla. So
True.
You want to teach your kids how to make, manage and multiply their money, not just give them money and say, have a nice life. Remember this saying, folks, you can't go to gym and do the workout for your kids. If you do the workout, you'll put on the muscle. So if you want your kids to be better with money, you can't just give them money. You have to show them how to make, manage and multiply their money, and give them ways of doing so in a supported environment. And that's where parents ultimately fail, because a lot of kids spell love M-O-N-E-Y. And then because parents come along and want their kids to be happy, and because they're probably hard workers, they say, look, I'm going to make you happy by buying you stuff. And then that creates this pattern of life that they just expect their parents are going to give them things. Well, that's not building muscle. That's handing out lollies. And that's fine. But when you're not around anymore to try and stop your kids from making mistakes, you just better hope that the mistakes your kids make aren't fatal.
I think this could be a problem with the parents as well, though, the lack of financial education that they actually have, because we're not taught how to invest in school, and we have to find people like yourself and other coaches and mentors out there that are teaching people how to generate wealth in various formats, whether it's real estate, stocks, or business, or shares. But I feel fortunate.
I'm big on this. You shouldn't be teaching these skills at school. You can't teach this out of a classroom. Kids will watch, they won't listen. Yeah. So they're watching the way you use your money, which is a point I'm making, Money Magnet, that your bad habits will become their bad habits. Much like learning to drive. You can teach your kids how to drive, but you can only teach your kids to drive as well as you can drive. Yeah. And so all your good habits and all your bad habits will be passed on inherently. Same with money. So that's why the sins of generations get passed on, because the habit, the patterning, the behavioral patterns are passed on. Unconsciously perhaps, but they're passed on. So why don't we teach this at school? Well, first of all, to teach it at school, we've got to stop teaching something else, because there's only so many hours in the day, right?
True.
And then second of all, are teachers who don't really know how to do this the best people to teach it anyway? Probably not. The best person to teach your kids how to be better with money is you, not me, you, right? Because that's the life skill that's going to happen over time, rather than a crash course in how to make it happen. There's a really good book. It's Millionaire Next Door. It's not new, but there's a concept in Millionaire Next Door called economic outpatient care. Let me tell you about it really quickly. We love our kids. We want the best for our kids. In fact, we want our kids, often as a parent, we want our kids to have the things that were special for us as normal for them. So, for instance, when I was a kid, we went for a holiday in a caravan. Well, I don't want caravan holidays for my kids. I wanted to take them overseas. I wanted to give them special experiences, and Positive Cashflow Property has allowed me to do that. But now my kids are adults. Guess where they expect to go for a holiday?
Overseas.
Overseas. They don't want to go down the road. Hey, I'm going to overseas. And when they go overseas, what kind of places do they want to stay in?
Best hotels.
And when they go, how do they want to fly?
Business or first.
And so we create this monster by trying to give them these experiences they can't have on their own, and they get used to a lifestyle they can't afford on their own. So they become economic outpatients of their parents, and they can never grow up on their own because they never grow out of the shadow of their parents. And they can never grow up as adults because they stay on the titty are the financial parents, Titty, for life. And so you're not allowing your kids to grow up. You're not allowing your kids to build that muscle by giving them stuff. The best thing you can say as a parent is no. But then you know, it's a dichotomy, because as a parent, you're like, I want better for my kids, but I'm forcing them to have to go the hard way. Yeah, that's right. They're building muscle. You can't go to gym and lift a weight you're not sort of feeling some effort in lifting and expect to put muscle on.
I love that. Really kind of hit home for me a little bit, because we've got a little 16, 17-month-old boy. We've got a little girl that's due in October. And yeah, we obviously want the best for them, but I don't want them to be spoon-fed and given everything. I want them to have the upbringing that I had. Hard work has been instilled in me from a young age. And I seen my father-in-law go to an ATM one day after my mother and him got together, but they divorced from their partners, and they walked away from everything to start again. And they went to an ATM to get £10 out the bank account, and they couldn't get any money out the bank account. And my mother stood there crying, and the guy said to her, "I'll never ever let this happen again." And I seen him work. They never invested, which was kind of cuts me up a little bit now, knowing what I know. But I seen this guy work his ass off from that day onwards to be mortgage free. They're in a pretty good position now. But them things that I seen of this guy working so hard, is they've instilled them hard work ethics into me. But when someone showed me about investing in property and generating wealth by investing, that was like a whole new steep learning curve for me as well. And I think combine the two together and it's a good outcome.
We wanted our kids to have a good education, so we invested a lot of money in their education. What I never saw coming was that they went to a good school, but there were other kids at that school whose parents were distant, not involved in their life, and perhaps divorced or whatever the case might be, and just showered these kids with whatever they wanted. Latest iPhone, a pony, a car, a blah, blah, blah. You want it? Here it is. And not just here, but here. And so our kids looked at that and went, why don't we have that? Don't you love us enough to give it to us? And then they became socially ostracized because they didn't have what everyone else had, the latest phone, the blah, blah, blah. So it becomes really hard watching your kids be socially isolated because you have certain values that you hold on to that other people don't have. And in a high socioeconomic environment like a private school, you're going to have to find a way to manage that, because your kids are going to come home and go, "Dad, I'm getting picked on because I don't have the latest $5,000 phone. And I don't wear the latest clothes." And you know what? There's always going to be someone in life who has more money than you and has more toys than you, and you're just going to have to deal with it.
Good lesson. And it's
hard lesson.
Yeah, hard lesson, but good.
And then, the whole social media thing after your kids, if you say to your kids you can't use your phone at nighttime, well, a lot of parents won't say that. And so social chitter-chatter goes on after hours into the wee hours of the morning. And if your kids are doing what they should be doing, which is probably being fast asleep and letting their brains rest and grow, then they'll wake up the following morning and go to school, and there'll be this whole conversation that's happened they've got no clue on. And even that's hard. But this is where, as a parent, you've got to work out which hill you're going to die on. And the same financially, you've got to work out what your non-negotiables are, and then stick to them when you're under attack, particularly.
This is the learning curve that I'm going through myself now.
And it's not easy. I'm not here to sugarcoat it for you.
Thanks. Let's talk about the tour that you've just been on, Steve, because I recently seen you in Perth. A little bit difficult for you to get there, wasn't it? A few flights got cancelled and delayed and moved around.
Perth's a long way away, and you never want to go from Adelaide to Perth via Melbourne and sit on the tarmac for an hour while the plane may or not go. But we got there in the end, and look, it was great to come to Perth. I don't do these market updates particularly often. The reason for it is it takes a lot of effort to go around, and they're very expensive to run. And particularly when I was doing them for free, like, how can you afford to do them for free? Well, partly because I've made a lot of money out of real estate and it's a give back. And partly because I love to come and meet people and hear stories about how they're going. But $50,000 is $50,000, right? You can do a lot of things with 50 grand.
Mm.
So at the market update, that's exactly what it was. I do research. I look at where the market's at the moment. I talk about what's driving the market. I talk about which capital cities, if you just wanted to go and invest somewhere. And because as investors, we always want to look at what's the upside versus what's the downside. And so the question I ask myself is, right now, regardless of the income side of the equation, if I just wanted to invest for growth, where's the safest place to invest for growth with what's happening with market conditions? And the way that I do that is I give each capital city a score across various different metrics, and then bang, whatever has the highest score out of 50 is the place where you should focus your attention. Mm. And in the last round of market updates, of course, it all changes over time as things change, but Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth, and I've been banging on about Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth for a while now, remain the hottest markets in the country, although Brisbane and Adelaide are starting to particularly look a little riskier in terms of possibly being overvalued against a long-term benchmark, whereas Perth still seems to have a fair bit of room to grow. The problem with Perth, of course, is that if you don't live in Perth, it's a long way away.
Especially if you need to fly here.
And expensive to fly there and stay in a hotel for a few days or whatever it might be. And if it's residential real estate, you no longer get a deduction to go and look at your property and come and meet your agent. So that's a bit of a problem.
True.
So I would say to people, normally the best place to invest is as close to home as you can afford. When you start to invest interstate, it adds risk into your portfolio, but you can still manage that risk. I mean, obviously investing in the United States of America, living in Australia was a risky thing to do, but so long as you've got good management, you can ameliorate that risk.
What I learned new about you at that presentation, Steve, is that you're a bit of a AI whiz.
I don't know about that. I bought the $20 a month version of Chat GPT, and I was playing around with draw me a picture of ... and was amazed at what came back and how quickly it came back. Fascinating.
It's incredible. I actually really like the cash cow that it drew.
Yeah, it's very good.
What sort of impact do you think artificial intelligence can have on the real estate investing and the market in general?
I think it'll be a great tool to help people to analyze data and large sums of data. Of course, it's only as good as the data that it finds to analyze. But I foresee moving forward that humans will never be able to subjugate their ability to think. But I think the way that we deal with things like due diligence, perhaps finding real estate opportunities, taking a whole lot of data which doesn't seem correlated, but finding relationships in the data is where AI excels. I'll give you an example of how it's been put to me. So if you're a doctor, you will largely become redundant pretty quickly with AI because you will never know as much as AI. But what you will become is the tool between the client and AI. So you will effectively interview the patient, AI will be listening, and then AI will prompt you to ask certain questions that you would once upon a time learn from textbooks and experience.
Is there any roles in the real estate industry that you think could be replaced by AI?
Pardon me. Roles in real estate. Well, I don't know that AI is going to be able to show you a home.
Not yet.
Maybe valuations, something around that sort of thing, where they can look at a lot of data, comp rents, comp sales, and sharpen up how accurate valuations can be. Possibly. Accountants are in trouble because AI will be able to crunch numbers and do process form filling tax returns, I think, faster than an accountant and cheaper. Lawyers are in trouble, writing agreements, etc. All that will evolve on AI, I think. So yeah, things are going to change. Now, I don't see it as bad that things are going to change. I just see it as people who can't evolve with the change are going to fall behind. So that's why I say to people, the sooner you can embrace AI and start playing around with it on a small scale, the better you'll be. And I can give you a story. So my brother is in IT, and he learnt computer programming in the 1980s. And my grandmother, who would have been in her 70s in the 1980s, went and did a basic computer programming course in her 70s. She didn't even own a computer. And I remember we were laughing at her saying, "Oh, Grandma, why'd you go and do that?" And she said, "Because I can see that this is the future, and I don't necessarily need to know how to do it, but I just want to know what's going on." And I would say the same thing now about AI. It's the future, and you can stick your head in the ground and be smacked by the future when it comes around, or you can say, "Look, I don't need to know everything, but it might be worthwhile just knowing something so that I can stay towards the front of the pack as the peloton moves away. Don't fall behind."
And it's evolving quite rapidly as well, isn't it? There's more and more plugins that are being created for ChatGPT. There's actually an accounting one. I've seen a legal one. There's the one that draws portraits of people.
Well, you're even more advanced than I am, but I would say this space is evolving very, very quickly, and it's not too late to sort of get off the ark, as it were, but don't leave it another year or two before you get around to doing something. You'll be left behind and scrambling to catch up.
Yeah. Before we go, Steve, can we talk about commercial property and the fund that you've established again in Australia? Because the last one was in America, wasn't it? And I heard very, very good things about that one. We had a few clients and a few friends that were involved in it. What's happening in Australia?
Yeah, so the first one was an Australian fund that invested in US commercial real estate via a US entity, and it did well. And of course, past performance isn't a guarantee of future performance. But as that was wrapping up, because I said I'd do it for 10 years and the 10 years is up, people started saying to me, "Steve, what are you doing next?" And I sort of said, "Well, nothing. I'm independently wealthy. I don't need to work anymore. What I teach, I do, eat my own cooking." And they're like, "Oh, but, we really need you to keep the show going." And I said, "Look, I'll tell you what, I won't get involved in the management, the compliance and the reporting anymore, but I'm happy to get involved with a new fund, help raise the money and do the commercial property finding and buying, i.e. find it, do the due diligence to make sure that it's a good investment." And so this new fund is called the Strategic Opportunities Growth and Income Fund. And there's only so many times you can say that a day until you get sick of saying it. So we abbreviate it to SOGIF, SOGIF. And with this new fund, what we're doing, it's about $90 million of funds under management at the moment. I'm the fund's biggest investor. Is that we are going out and buying a mix of what we call efficient and inefficient assets. Efficient assets because they tend to be listed investments, typically on international and Australia, and we do that as a way of mitigating risk by just owning pure real estate in the portfolio. And then on the other side of it, we say an inefficient asset because there's something about the property where there's a mismatch between the return and the risk. And because it's not a listed investment, there's no listed stock exchange for commercial real estate. If you've got skill and expertise, you can make money by buying problems and turning them into solutions or finding ways to value add over time. So that is what we're doing in this fund. And the sorts of properties we're buying typically are in the $5 to $15 million price point range. So too expensive for mum and dads, not quite big enough for true instos. And what we're doing, positive cash flow, of course. And then we're giving people a chance to come on the ride with us a second time, subject to them reading the offer document and making sure that it's suitable for them. It's a retail fund, so it's not only for rich people. And what we're doing with my kids, for instance, is encourage. We put the stake in for them to get in, and then said to them, "Well, you need to continually top up your investment, and then start learning these investing skills as a participant, rather than just mum and dad doing things for you. We're going to teach you how to invest." So if you're someone that wants to co-invest with me, the sorts of properties that I buy according to the things that I teach, then you're welcome to go and do some more investigation about whether the opportunity is right for you.
Cool. You're going to actually run some webinars on this, Steve, only because the two that you did just recently touched on this. I'm just going to quickly pull up my calendar because this podcast will be released on the 22nd of May. Can't believe it's May already. So is there any webinars that are after that date that people can tune into to find out more about it?
The best way to find out more is to go to the website, which is sogif.au, sogif.au. And if you do /ROI, you can pop in your details. And then we do webinars every month or so, new onboarding webinars where we talk more about the fund and what's going on and invite people along to it. So you're welcome to come along to one of them, or you can just go to the website, sogif.au, and read the offer document and get in touch with us with any questions you might have.
And we'll put the link to the website in the show notes. Also, the links to your books as well, especially Money Magnet, because if people haven't read that, I highly recommend reading it. It's a cracker. Last question before I let you go, Steve. If you were to start all over again and you didn't have the reputation that you do now, but you do have the knowledge that you have, what would you do? How would you start again? And what would you invest in?
Now, I've thought about this question a bit over the years. What happens if it all goes wrong? So the first thing I'd say is that you never want to be a seller in a down market. That's how you can go bust. And my grandfather used to have a saying, which I think I faithfully recount when I say it this way: you won't go broke if you don't owe money. So I have no debt in my portfolio, none whatsoever. And so if real estate prices go down, doesn't matter. No one's going to force me to sell a property in a down market. I might lose value on paper, doesn't matter. So long as I've got cash flow coming in, and I can even afford to drop the rent, because low rent's better than no rent, right? Mentor taught me that, good lesson. You can survive. But the second you start loading up with debt and it goes against you, you can really go out the door backwards. So, but let's assume that I lost all my money somehow and I had to start again from scratch today. While I might lose money, unless some medical episode happens, I haven't lost knowledge. So I would JV with people and use their money and my knowledge to get going again. The problem with needing money is when you need money, you can never find it. And when you don't need it, it's everywhere, right? That's just the thing about money, is that it is repelled by need. It's a weird thing. So if I couldn't find other people's money and I couldn't borrow money, then what I'd do is I'd go and find deals for other people and get paid as a bird dog.
Beautiful. Like a buyer's agent. There seems to be a rise of buyer's agents coming through the system at the minute, doesn't there?
Yeah, but just because you're a buyer's agent doesn't mean you know what you're doing. It just means you've called yourself a buyer's agent, might have done some study. And one of the things I realize is that a client who doesn't know what they want will attract a buyer's agent who doesn't know what they need. And they're a dangerous combination. Because the buyer's agent will tell you what they think you need. And if you don't know whether or not that's good or bad, you might buy it. And then you get what you get and you don't get upset.
Yeah.
Remember this, good way to finish up. The more things you leave to chance, the more chance there is that things will go wrong. If you want a more secure financial future, leave less things to chance and more things to choice.
Beautiful. Love it, Steve. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, mate. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely, Neil. And thank you again for the opportunity, and for everyone watching or listening to this. I just wish you all the best with your investing.
Thank you, mate. And I've got this saying, this might resonate with you, Steve. Every master was once a disaster and every winner was once a beginner.
That's a good one.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you can stay up to date with all cash flow positive property updates.